Welcome to literary and jury charge practice. Let's start out with some jury charge. Ready? Here we go. The New York State human rights law imposes liability for retaliation on a corporate employer where the offending employee is a high-level managerial employee and where that employee was acting within the scope of his employment when he unlawfully retaliated against the plaintiff. In determining whether a manager acted within the scope of his employment, you must consider the following factors. 1. Whether the employee's adverse action fell within the discretion and control of the employer. 2. Whether the employee acted upon the express or implied authority of the employer. 3. Whether the employee's adverse action was in furtherance of the employer's interests. 4. Whether the employee was discharging his duty to the employer by taking an adverse action against Ms. Bobang. 5. Whether the adverse action was part of the work assigned by the employer. And 6. Whether the adverse action was so closely connected with what the employee was hired to do that it may be regarded as a method, even though an improper one, of carrying out the objectives of the employment. Where a manager engages in conduct for wholly personal reasons which are outside the scope of his employment, the employer is not responsible for that conduct. However, even where a manager engages in conduct for a wrongful purpose or with partially personal motives, the employer is liable if the manager engaged in the conduct to further the interests of the employer or as part of the work assigned by the employer. In assessing Ms. Bobang's claim against New York Global Group, you must consider whether 1. Ms. Bobang was an employee of New York Global Group, and 2. A high-level managerial employee of New York Global Group while acting within the scope of his employment with New York Global Group unlawfully retaliated against Ms. Bobang. If you find that Ms. Bobang was employed by New York Global Group and that a high-level managerial employee of New York Global Group while acting within the scope of his employment with New York Global Group unlawfully retaliated against Ms. Bobang, you will find New York Global Group liable for retaliation under the state human rights law. Similarly, in assessing Ms. Bobang's claims against FNL Media, you must consider whether 1. Ms. Bobang was an employee of FNL Media and 2. A high-level managerial employee of FNL Media while acting within the scope of his employment with FNL Media unlawfully retaliated against Ms. Bobang. If you find that Ms. Bobang was employed by FNL Media and that a high-level managerial employee of FNL Media while acting within the scope of his employment with FNL Media unlawfully retaliated against Ms. Bobang, you will find FNL Media liable for retaliation under the state human rights law. If you find that either New York Global Group or FNL Media, but not both, retaliated against Ms. Bobang in violation of the state human rights law, you must go on to determine whether New York Global Group and FNL Media constitute a single employer. To determine whether New York Global Group and FNL Media constitute a single employer for purposes of plaintiff's retaliation claim under the state human rights law, you should use the same 4-factor test that I explained above in connection with Ms. Bobang's quid pro quo sexual harassment claims under the New York State and city human rights laws. If you find that Ms. Bobang has established by a preponderance of the evidence that New York Global Group and FNL Media constitute a single employer under this test, FNL Media is liable under the New York State human rights law for any retaliation attributable to New York Global Group, and the New York Global Group is liable for any retaliation attributable to FNL Media. If you find that plaintiff has proven all elements of her retaliation claim as to a particular adverse action and as to a particular defendant, you must determine whether the defendant you are considering has established an affirmative defense. The defendants claim that they would have taken the same actions against Ms. Bobang regardless of any protected activity she engaged in. If you find that any defendant has proven by a preponderance of the evidence that that defendant would have taken the same action regardless of any protected activity Ms. Bobang engaged in and regardless of any retaliatory motive, then that defendant has established its affirmative defense and you must return a verdict in favor of that defendant on this claim. Ms. Bobang also asserts a retaliation claim under the New York City human rights law. The elements of a retaliation claim under the city human rights law are similar to those under the state human rights law, but there are some important differences which I will explain. To prevail on her retaliation claim under New York City human rights law, Ms. Bobang must prove each of the following 4 elements by a preponderance of the evidence. 1. That she engaged in protected activity such as making a complaint to her employer about unlawful sexual harassment or unlawful retaliation. 2, that the protected activity Ms. Boveng engaged in was known to the defendant you are considering. 3, that the defendant you are considering engaged in conduct that was reasonably likely to deter a person from engaging in that protected activity. And 4, that the defendant's conduct was motivated, at least in part, by Ms. Boveng's protected activity. In deciding whether Ms. Boveng's engaged in protected activity under the city human rights law, the instructions regarding protected activity set forth in connection with Ms. Boveng's New York State human rights law retaliation claim apply with equal force. In claiming that she engaged in protected activity for purposes of the New York City human rights law, Ms. Boveng again relies on 1, her lawyer's April 29, 2014 letter to Mr. Way, 2, her lawyer's transmission of a draft complaint on May 7, 2014, and 3, the filing of the complaint in this lawsuit. In deciding whether Ms. Boveng has proved that the defendants were aware that she had engaged in protected activity, the instructions on this issue given in connection with Ms. Boveng's New York State human rights law retaliation claim apply with equal force to her city human rights law retaliation claim. The third element of a retaliation claim under the city human rights law is that the defendant you are considering engaged in conduct that was reasonably likely to deter a person from engaging in that protected activity. To find that this element has been proven, you need not find that the retaliation Ms. Boveng complains of resulted in an ultimate action with respect to her employment or in a materially adverse change in the terms and conditions of her employment. Here, Ms. Boveng contends that the following actions constitute conduct that was reasonably likely to deter a person from engaging in protected activity. 1, Mr. Way's communications to Ms. Boveng, to her family, and to her friends and business associates after April 29, 2014, and 2, the blot articles received in evidence to the extent that statements in these articles A, accuse Ms. Boveng of a serious crime, B, tend to injure Ms. Boveng in her trade, business, or profession, and C, impute unchastity to Ms. Boveng. As I stated in discussing Ms. Boveng's state law retaliation claim, I will define a number of these terms in connection with plaintiff's defamation claim. These definitions in the defamation section of these instructions apply with equal force to Ms. Boveng's New York State human rights law and New York City human rights law retaliation claims. To constitute retaliatory conduct under the city human rights law, a defendant's conduct need not be materially adverse to a plaintiff. Instead, you need only find that the conduct at issue was reasonably likely to deter a person from engaging in protected activity. Actions reasonably likely to deter a person from engaging in protected activity may include actions taken by an employer after the employer has terminated an employee's employment. This element may be satisfied by evidence that an employer blacklisted a former employee, wrongfully refused to write a recommendation to prospective employers, or sullied the former employee's reputation by making disparaging and false statements about the former employee, where the jury concludes that such conduct would be reasonably likely to deter a person from engaging in protected activity. In deciding whether the conduct at issue constitutes conduct that is reasonably likely to deter a person from engaging in protected activity, you must keep in mind that not every instance of negative conduct amounts to conduct that is reasonably likely to deter a person from engaging in protected activity. Petty slights and minor annoyances do not constitute conduct that is reasonably likely to deter a person from engaging in protected activity. You must also keep in mind that context matters and that the significance of any given act will depend upon the particular circumstances. We will stop there and practice some literary material. Let's see what we have here. This is a short one. It's called Ride the Wave. Ready? Here we go. Ride the wave. Surfing in California is less a sport than a state of mind. Sure, you can rent a board and paddle out to any number of epic breaks in Orange County, but you'll be missing out on the camaraderie that makes the experience so special. Enter Bonsai Surf School, where you and your friends can sign up for private lessons in Huntington Beach. Skilled instructors will demonstrate safety tips on land before letting you dive in. This format is vastly preferable to mixed group lessons, which are usually filled with strangers watching you wipe out. $249 includes 2 hours for 2 surfers, plus a soft type surfboard and full body wetsuit. I told you it was short. All right, let's move on to some more literary material, and this will be longer, I promise. It's called On Location with Hawaii Five-0. Ready? Here we go. Diamond Head, Pearl Harbor, Honolulu skyline, a curling wave crashing into cerulean waters. Thus begins the seductive rapid-fire opening credit sequence of the new Hawaii Five-0, a reboot of the legendary TV crime series that ran from 1968 to 1980. This modern version of showrunner and executive producer Peter Lenkov, who's also known for CSI New York, broadcasts Friday nights on CBS, transporting not only the dynamic police work and witty banter of McGarrett, Alex O'Loughlin, Dano, Scott Kane, Kano, Grace Park, Chin Ho, Daniel Day Kim, and Captain Lou Grover, Chi McBride to the world, but also America's Paradise. Hawaii is a character in the show, says on-site co-executive producer Jeffrey Downer. You couldn't film it anywhere else. Now in its 6th season, Five-0 has a production team that knows Hawaii inside out and has discovered neighborhoods where it loves to work. With an island of possibilities and between 200 and 300 locations required every season, the only trick is choosing. Location, location, location. It's all about the look, says Five-0 location manager Timmy Chin, who was raised on Oahu, where nearly all the action occurs. That's a big, big thing to find the look. Part of what helps me is I grew up here when the original Five-0 was on television. Not that this one is anything like that, but when I read a script, I get ideas. Each season, a new episode is filmed every 7 to 8 days and uses an average of 40 locations. The demanding schedule means that each day during the production, 8 to 10 Oahu locations must be scouted. It's a carefully orchestrated hands-on selection process that begins with when a new script arrives about a month in advance. Chin, Downer, and the production designer Keith Neely first share ideas with each other. That trio and additional crew then visit a slew of sites, say different parks, for the producer and episode director to narrow down. A more senior team that includes Downer returns in person to call the list further. Then it's up to Lenkov in Los Angeles to make the final choice. We do this for every location, says Chin, and once Lenkov approves, Chin's team returns to negotiate agreements, fees, trailers, and parking for crew and catering of their location staff. Also, snap more photos to assist with set design and other details. Locations are key to everything, says Downer. Once you find those, everything falls into place. Files are maintained on different neighborhoods, homes, businesses, and hotels that might work even years in the future. When the season 6 premiere called for a house explosion, for instance, Chin immediately contacted a homeowner who had offered the show just that opportunity a year before. While the look of each site connects directly to character and plot, often reflecting Hawaii's natural beauty, location choices are also balanced against a heavy production schedule and a logistical puzzle that includes everything from actor availability and public patience to quality of sunlight. Five-0 has filmed on neighbor islands only twice and, whenever possible, sticks close to its home base at the state-owned Hawaii Film Studio stage near Diamond Head to increase efficiency. Other spots might be chosen because logistics are better or because the actors will be backlit, while other scenes might be moved outdoors to include more of Hawaii's stunning ocean and mountain panoramas. We want people to look at our show and say that's Hawaii, says Neely, whether they're looking at a mansion, a pineapple field, or simply a white sand beach. Right, we will get back to that. Now let's try some more jury charge. Ready? Here we go. The fourth element of retaliation under the city human rights law that Ms. Bovang must prove by a preponderance of the evidence is that the defendant's desire to retaliate against her for engaging in a protected activity was a motivating factor in the decision to engage in conduct that was reasonably likely to deter a person from engaging in protected activity. Ms. Bovang contends that the defendants took action against her because she protested sexual harassment and retaliation by Mr. Wei. Defendants claim that the actions at issue were taken because of their legitimate concerns about plaintiff's job performance and in order to defend their reputation. In order to carry out her burden as to this element, Ms. Bovang need not establish that her protected activity was the sole or principal reason for any action that a defendant took against her that constitutes contact that would be reasonably likely to deter a person from engaging in protected activity. The city human rights law is violated when retaliatory intent is a motivating factor for a defendant's action, whether or not that retaliatory motive was the sole cause for the action. If Ms. Bovang proves that there was a retaliatory motive for any action defendants took against her that would be reasonably likely to deter a person from engaging in protected activity, this element is satisfied. Ms. Bovang may show either that the individual who made the decision to take such action was motivated in part by a desire to retaliate against her, or that an individual who was substantially motivated by retaliatory intent played a meaningful role in the decision. The instructions I gave you in connection with Ms. Bovang's retaliation claim under the state human rights law regarding circumstantial evidence of retaliatory motive and non-retaliatory reasons apply with equal force to her retaliation claim under the city human rights law. The New York City human rights law imposes liability on an employer where the offending employee exercised managerial or supervisory responsibility and where that employee was acting within the scope of his employment when he unlawfully retaliated against the plaintiff. In determining whether Mr. Wei acted within the scope of his employment under the city human rights law, you should use the same six-factor test that I explained above in connection with Ms. Bovang's retaliation claim under the New York State human rights law. In assessing Ms. Bovang's claim against New York Global Group, you must consider whether 1. Ms. Bovang was an employee of New York Global Group, and 2. Any manager or supervisor of New York Global Group, while acting within the scope of his employment with New York Global Group, unlawfully retaliated against Ms. Bovang. If you find that Ms. Bovang was employed by New York Global Group and that a manager or supervisor of New York Global Group, while acting within the scope of his employment with New York Global Group, unlawfully retaliated against Ms. Bovang, you will find New York Global Group liable for retaliation under the city human rights law. Similarly, in assessing Ms. Bovang's claims against FNL Media, you must consider whether 1. Ms. Bovang was an employee of FNL Media, and 2. Any manager or supervisor of FNL Media, while acting within the scope of his employment with FNL Media, unlawfully retaliated against Ms. Bovang. If you find that Ms. Bovang was employed by FNL Media and that a manager or supervisor of FNL Media, while acting within the scope of his employment with FNL Media, unlawfully retaliated against Ms. Bovang, you will find FNL Media liable for retaliation under the city human rights law. If you find that either New York Global Group or FNL Media, but not both, retaliated against Ms. Bovang in violation of the city human rights law, you must go on to determine whether New York Global Group and FNL Media constitute a single employer. To determine whether New York Global Group and FNL Media constitute a single employer under the city human rights law, You will use the same 4-factor test that I explained above in connection with Ms. Bobang's quid pro quo sexual harassment claims under the New York State and city human rights laws. All right, that will conclude our literary and jury charge practice.